I'm going to do an overview of our journey now. We're looking at the nervous system tone. We're looking at the myofascial release, so releasing the neurological holding patterns of misaligned posture. It's learning body awareness so that you can make active adjustments. Then it's applying resistance so that you can reflexively hold yourself in a good baseline posture where you can breathe deeply. And then you're looking at mechanical inefficiencies in your movement and what are causing those mechanical inefficiencies. And that's kind of where I'll feel myself running and sprinting. If I feel myself in slow motion running, I'll notice, okay, like I'm turning more on this side, I'm not swinging my arm up here, like I'm holding more tension on this side of my body. And then I have data to actually work from. You kind of have to know what you're looking for. You have to understand gait mechanics and gait patterns, and you have to figure out what are you actually looking for here. The average person isn't going to see hip jarring as a problem. You're not going to see a lack of stability in the lumbopelvic hip complex in relation to lateral and spiraling forces. You have to film yourself. You have to move. You have to understand, like in movement, where your inefficiencies happening and how can you train the capacity for more reflexive, efficient movement.
Or just hire a coach.
Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the podcast. I am joined by my friend Ali. We're going to have another conversation about movement, biomechanics-informed training, functional fitness, the whole 9 yards. And today I wanted to talk to you, dude, about how a person builds up a functional foundation in training. Like what is the actual process of taking someone who, and there's going to be different cohorts and different starting places, but like, let's say we have a person who is just gen pop, generally unfit. You have a person who is like me, who spent years weightlifting and building a strength foundation over a dysfunctional frame. So I have like, a scapular winging and all these other issues, and developed a very imbalanced physique and very tight bound, kind of muscle bound physique, lifting weights. And then maybe someone who has an athletic background, who has kind of a natural, athletic tendency, but has some injuries and stuff. Like, how do you take someone and actually build that foundation of functional movement from the ground up? And that was something that's kind of been on my mind as I've been reflecting on, like, what are the foundations of functional fitness? We kind of defined what functional fitness is, what function means, what fitness means. And then now I'm thinking in terms of the practical side of, like, okay, if I was going to teach someone how to do this, what is the step-by-step journey that a person goes on to achieve that level of function and that level of fitness? I think the challenge that we're going to run into in this conversation is the level of individuality that each person and each starting point runs into when you're thinking about, like, how to map out a journey for someone to attain function. But I'd love to get your take on it in terms of, like, is there a systemized approach that you have for helping someone build their functional baseline to move better and move well?
Yeah, well, individuality is definitely important, and every individual is going to have different problems. But there are, based on the way, based on our culture right now, we do have certain patterns. Like, we all look down on our phone. Most of us have, we sit at our jobs in front of a desk, in front of a computer, and the stress inputs of our everyday life are very similar. So while every individual is different, there is overarching problems that kind of apply to most people. So the first thing that I focus on is a person's nervous system tone. So are they more in a fight or flight, in danger, sympathetic nervous tone, or are they more calm? Are they in rest and digest, parasympathetic? And so that's the first thing. So if I see a person come in and they're super stressed, they're on anxiety medicine and they can't sleep, the last thing they want to do is high impact movements. So what I do first generally, and it just so happens with our current culture that most people are in sympathetic tone. Most people are in fight or flight because of work stress, life stress, everyday things in life. And the way we move, the way we carry about life is adding extra stress. Last episode we talked about a bottom up and a top down effect in our body. If you stand proud right? You start feeling confident and proud. And if you are crouching over, you start feeling less confident and more submissive, let's say. So, and it goes the other way around. When you're super stressed out, your posture starts showing itself, and you're able to see that in people. So the first thing we do is breathing. Teaching a person, how do you breathe? What are the mechanisms? What are the uh, not only the mechanisms but the patterns in breathing? What do you need to hype yourself up or cool yourself down, right? And most people need to learn to cool down. You ask a lot. Sorry, you ask a lot of people to breathe, right? And their exhales are just fast and and you're like, calm the breathing, and they think about like inhaling, yeah, and there might be a slower inhale, but they never think about slowly exhaling. And so this is something that I've had to teach a lot of people.
Well, I
What
think a
like
lot
the
of people extrapolate. They think about like slowing their breath down as just like taking longer breaths, and they're still just inhaling as they're just inhaling longer and exhaling longer, but still with the
exactly.
same like intensity. So it's like a softer breath and a softer inhale exhale is literally you're just taking in and expelling less air on average, right? It's not like it's like it should be not even auditorially perceptive.
Yeah, like a
You should,
ninja.
yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
so that's interesting because in terms of determining where a person is in their nervous system tone, things like their body and I'm thinking practically if someone's listening to this, they're like, how do I self-assess that? How do I figure out what kind of nervous system tone I'm occupying? There's all different kinds of things that you could look at another person. You could look at their body language. Are they fidgeting? Are they frenetic? Are they kind of like, are their eyes darting around? Can they not look at one thing just calmly and focus in and dial in on one particular area? Is their breathing labored? Is it fast? Is it really shallow in the upper part of their chest? Do they have a little bit of a hunched shoulder and kind of like you can kind of almost see neurotic tension holding itself in the body, and little tells like excessive clenching in the jaw. You can see a little tension when they're or they have to chew gum all the time. That's another thing that I find is if a person needs some sort of a stress outlet or an oral fixation outlet
Hmm.
because they have no ability to regulate their own nervous system or regulate their own nervous system tone, they're constantly looking for some sort of fidgety, chewy oral fixation type thing to help down regulate themselves or at least help them, turn off some of the buzz that's kind of going on. Internally, you can also, I think one of the biggest benefits of a meditation practice is observing the quality of your default mode network of how you think.
Hmm.
And, one of the shifts that meditation brought me was the idea that I'm not really thinking every thought that I have. Thoughts are arising based on the state of my body's state and my overall energy state. And so by practicing meditation and practicing observing my thoughts sitting down, I can see it's like, oh, like I have a really frenetic bouncing from one thing to another, overly focused on problems, overly focused on this, this stressful thing. And I'm creating this feedback loop of these stress chemicals that are that are basically being produced in reaction to thoughts that I'm having. And it's kind
Hmm.
of this feedback loop. I'm like, I'm in this stress state. Those stress states create stressful thoughts. Those stressful thoughts create stressful hormones, and it just loops, right? And so meditation kind of helps you take a step back and look at what are the thoughts that are naturally arising when you're just still, because that's not universally indicative, but it can be a clue as to what state your nervous system is and what state
Hmm.
your overall energy is. So if you're having just like calm thoughts, or you're thinking about random things, or you're like thinking of a memory that you had with a friend, or you just literally like thoughts that produce calm, neutral
Hmm.
emotion,
Yeah,
then
that's
you go
That's
ahead.
pretty interesting because people think of meditation as a practice to induce calm. However, you're kind of viewing it as like an evaluation of your state of being, which is which is very interesting. I normally don't think of it. I've never thought of it like that, but it is true. It's very true. If you just sit with yourself, what kind of thoughts are going through your mind, and how often are the thoughts changing? How long can you carry out one thought? And there is other mechanisms in place, like how's your sleep, and that will tell you if you're a super stressed person, you're going to wake up in the middle of the night and not be able to go back to sleep, and or you have just the way you carry conversations, like how long can you pay attention to a conversation. These are all tell signs of whether you're in a state of fight or flight or rest or digest.
And I know, I mean, this is why you just added the yin class at your gym, right? Is that you wanted to give people an opportunity to create this down regulating effect. And the response you're getting from people is like, it's really beneficial. Like people are like coming back and they're like, whoa. So when it comes to developing, getting people into a more balanced nervous system tone, how do you practically go about doing that? What are the like the methods and the techniques and some of the different
So
ways to do it?
first we look at the, breathing again, the vagus nerve and how it affects our nervous system. And so we try to, with calm breathing, that's how you uh, stimulate the nerve, the vagus nerve, which brings about a state of calm. So that's the first thing. And then deep tissue massage is something that we do a lot of, also known as myofascial release, or trigger point therapy in a lot of ways. And I mean, it doesn't necessarily need to happen, through self myofascial release. Actually, Will has a really nice, Dr. William Raybar has a really cool cup that he's kind of invented himself, and it could be done through that. There's just deep tissue manipulation, and that's another paired up with breathing. So we kind of keep the breathing.
Can I add a note to that? Because
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
so there's a difference that I find between some of the myofascial, like the neuromyofascial release that happens from self massage when you're like sitting on a foam roller or you're using a Theracane, or even you're getting deep tissue massage and you're getting some of this stuff done to you versus like, Dr. Will has these cups that are attached to a vacuum unit. And what that's doing is it's like it's pulling the fascia and it's like pulling blood in. And that's actually like more of an actual tissue manipulation effect. But what I find the real beneficial of, say, being on a foam roller or like doing some trigger point therapy is when your muscles and your tissues and they tense up neurologically. You have this neurological tension and this holding pattern, this protective holding pattern that is, when you're touching it, it kind of stimulates that. What you're doing when you combine that with breathing is you're training the capacity to relax intentionally, and
Yeah.
you're trying to allow your tissues to relax over and surrender to or give to, without holding and tensioning and protecting and guarding. That's the skill of relaxation. You're training the capacity to relax versus in kind of a more conventional resistance training setting, you're training the capacity to produce tension in a myofascial release setting. And there's all kinds of debate about the validity of myofascial release, because a lot of manual therapies don't actually produce a lot of tissue direct changes, but there are a lot of neurological inhibitions that get released when you're doing that. So it's more of a neurological effect in a lot of these cases when you're doing these self massage things, as opposed to direct tissue changes. Like, yeah, there's an increased blood flow. There is, like a little bit of rehydration of like you compress a tissue, you decompress a tissue. There's more hydration and nutrients that come into that tissue, sure. But people are thinking it's like, oh, like I'm releasing adhesions and I'm stretching it apart and stuff. That's more what Will's doing with those cups,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's pulling adhesions apart and engorging it and like literally decompressing the tissues because of a vacuum of, sucking it from the outside. Versus when you're sitting on a foam roller and you're compressing, you're allowing yourself to learn how to relax your nervous system to release tension. You're
Yes.
literally just training yourself to know how to release tension. So that was
100%.
just a quick little, I wanted to throw that in there.
And yeah, and that's why the breathing part is so important, and it's one of the first things that we talk about in the yin classes is like there is a point where the pain might become too much, and so you might find yourself breathing through your mouth or frowning or like in agony, right? And you actually don't want to do that. You want to keep a calm face. You want to keep your breathing as calm as you can, and you're kind of actually actively with your brain sending signals with your thinking to of relaxation to the body part. So say I'm super tight on my in my pec major, and I'm kind of going and it hurts. What I do is just literally as if I'm talking to my pec major, I close my eyes and I breathe and I kind of tell it to calm down, and it just it's like, it's okay, everything's going to be fine, and you just allow that, and it works. It Every once in a while you get a twitch, and all of a sudden you feel a release. Sometimes it's emotional release, so and that's the coolest thing about this. And I think the most profound part, yes, it definitely helps with muscle tightness and soreness. It definitely helps with re-establishing balance in your body. But the most profound part for me is how effective it is in just getting people's emotions to just flow through. I've talked about this before. I've had clients cry, like literally, especially when we work around the diaphragm, and just the belly around that area. You sometimes get people just get memories. I've had it happen to myself. I've had someone working on my jaw, and all of a sudden I had these, because I had a tonsil surgery as a baby, and I just had flashbacks of these memories that I had never even thought about, since then. Like it kind of got erased out of my memory. So, there is, and to this day, we don't really know whether memories get stored in our brain or in our body or both. So it's really profound, the effects I've seen on people with it. So and a lot of times people are like, okay, like I got myself a lacrosse ball, or and the terracane and all these tools. Now where do I go? And that is like the real question. And that's where the individualism and the art comes in. Like you look at a person and you're like, okay, well, this person, his shoulders are in a kyphosis, and they're rolled forward, so you can tell, oh, his chest is probably super tight, right? Because they're pulling forward like that. And so what you do is you release that, and after a while of releasing that, you allow the shoulder to fall, the scapula to fall back in place. And this applies to a lot of different things. We sit down a lot and we work, so there's a lot of stress input, and it goes into our hip flexors. And so most people have tight hip flexors, or the diaphragm, where a lot, when you, and this is another way I associate feelings to physical, like emotions to physical sensations, is if I told you to think about the last time you were super sad, or if you were mourning, or you were broken up with or something, the feeling for most people happens right under the chest, right under the heart, right? And that actually is a physical sensation associated with sadness. And so there is physical tightness in that area. And when you release that, it's just, so a lot of people have these tension points, and you just have to look at a person standing up and you go, okay, what is inhibiting them from standing upright? What are and sometimes it's physical. Sorry, did you want to say something?
Yeah. Well, I mean, like you can see, like, for example, you say you have that tension in that diaphragm area, in that chest, right? Then you can also see how that causes other issues upstream. If someone collapses in on their chest a little bit, then their neck starts to crane forward, and maybe they compress in their cervical spine a little bit too much, and then, like, as a compensation, there's different things happening in their hip and their knees. Like there's But then if you can find, the real crux of, like, where's this originating from? What are all these other tight spots or these other misalignments? What's the crux of, where's this happening from? You're still going to have to release the neck. You're still going to have to release all the other parts that are the upstream effects of this tightening, or this guarding, or this dysfunction, or this weaker spot that's not turned on from sitting, or whatever it happens to be. But you can kind of see like neuropsychologically and physiopsychologically how a person like carries themselves and how they guard and how they how they inhibit their movement and their system. It's a
Mm-hmm.
huge thing. I wanted to also just quickly throw this one out too, where I know last time I was referencing a study where people who did Botox and weren't able to move their face into certain positions, like they weren't able to frown, people were curing depression because of that, because they couldn't frown. They literally couldn't access the facial expression associated with sadness. And so your facial expression signals nervous system inputs to inform your emotions, to inform how you feel about certain things. And when you're grimacing, when you're doing a myofascial release technique, or when you're, exerting a lot of effort and you're grimacing, and you're like, you're contorting your face in all these different types of ways, you're sending nervous system signals about the pain that you're experiencing to produce more guarding and more tensioning.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why when I'm doing myofascial release with myself or with a client, I'm always kind of reminding, it's like, try to keep as relaxed of a face as possible and breathe deep. Try to signal to your nervous system that it's okay to release and to let go, and that it's all right. This pain is there, but it's not a threat, and it's not going to hurt. The pain won't hurt you, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And the more that you grimace, them, like even if like I'm digging into my pec right now, and I made a bit of a grimacing face, and I actually felt the musculature in association with my it clenches up, versus if I'm
Yeah.
just relaxed. And even if I dig deep, deep, deep into my pec, and it hurts like hell right now, but it stays relaxed, and it gives into the pressure if I stay relaxed. But as soon as I grimace, like I didn't even do anything on purpose, but I just like squinted my eyes a little bit, and it like flexes my pec to try and protect it.
Mm-hmm.
It's
I
interesting.
always think of like because of my martial arts background, I always think of a samurai
Mm,
and how a samurai doesn't fold under pain. It doesn't show you how much pain he's in or whether it hurts or not.
yeah.
And growing up, fighting in competitions and stuff, I had a really tough coach. My first coach ever. His name is Ace, and the toughest guy ever. And he would not let me breathe hard. He's like, just hold your composure. Just don't let them know you're tired. Don't let them know you're
Mm,
hurt. Don't let anybody know that. And I basically treat my fascial release like that. It's like, don't let it affect my breathing. Don't let it affect my face. Try to be as calm and collected as possible.
yeah,
Yeah.
for
So
real.
like, if I was to like compare it to a broken guitar, right? The first stage is like getting the body back together, right? Which is breathing, getting it to like be a playable body, right? Then it's kind of like putting the strings back on, right? Which is myofascial release. And
Mm-hmm.
then retensioning, like tuning the guitar is
Mm,
the last part of it is like, creating tension throughout the body with corrective exercises that allow you to stand upright. And these are doable, right? Like if I release my shoulder, right? Like I was saying, a kyphosis, and I release my shoulder, right? And this is all of a sudden able to relax it a little bit, and then now I retension it so that it's nice and in place properly. And then I
mm,
teach my nervous system what it feels like to stand in this position. What is life? What does the input feel like, right? How my like what do my eyes see now? Because a lot of times, most of us, because of phones or lack of confidence or whatever it is, we look down, we look at the floor, and most of life's input is from here down, and we don't see what actually happens in the outside of that, right?
the upper sphere of our vision. Yeah.
Yeah, and it can have, I feel like it's super limited to look like this, and once you open your eyes up to see everything else, all of a sudden you have access to a lot more.
I'm
and
looking
in,
like
and
over my laptop screen here, looking up at the light and stuff.
yeah, yeah, and it's that's exactly it. It's like there's the world, and it's like, imagine um claustrophobia, like the feeling of claustrophobia, right? Like you just you and I could see how, if you're seeing everything from down here, how that could induce anxiety, right? Because you're like, I'm limited, right?
Mm.
Whereas if you can see the whole world, so yeah, so you feel what does it feel like to stand upright? And we kind of work on that, work on retensioning the body, telling your hips to sit in the right place. And then we just look at different different points in your body and try to put them in the right position. Maybe some needs strengthening, maybe some needs a little bit more loosening, right? And we tune the body up.
Well, I like this analogy of a guitar because there's another layer of a guitar when you're tightening the strings that is actually relevant. Inside the neck of a guitar, there's a long metal rod in electric guitars and most acoustic guitars with steel strings. Not so much in classical guitars, but in those more modern guitars, there's a rod called a truss rod, and you adjust the truss rod to adjust how much tension the neck can actually withstand because there's hundreds of pounds of pressure to a guitar that's tuned up to a standard tuning. And
Mm-hmm.
the truss rod alignment is going to affect the intonation and how far off the neck the strings are when you tune it to pitch. So you can fully tune up a guitar and you can fully tighten the strings, but if the truss rod isn't adjusted properly, the neck will start to warp
Mm-hmm.
and it'll start to move out of place. And then the guitar is not going to be in tune when you play it. And the strings are going to be too far off the fretboard. It's going to be harder to play. And what I'm kind of thinking is like when you're talking about like retensioning, you're not just teaching tensioning in terms of like, okay, now that you've released these muscles, learn how to flex this and like, build strength. You're actually talking about retensioning in an integrated way with the structure aligned. So you're actually thinking about the positions of the bones relative to each other and the actual structure, the structural support of your whole system, and then tensioning in a way that builds and wraps around that. And that's
Mm-hmm.
kind of where the analogy is kind of lining up for me is like you are also focusing on getting your truss rod adjusted before you're tightening the strings, as in you're teaching people how to position their body in space and then creating tensions to support that.
Exactly. Exactly. And and it's not just like, oh, we go through one step, then it's the other, then it's the other. It's actually all happening kind of simultaneously. I mean, one happens after the other, and then we might have to go back and do stuff again. You'd be surprised how much your breathing will improve when you learn how to stand properly. You'd be surprised how much your breathing will improve when you are able to when you do effective myofascial release. um, and vice versa. You would be surprised how much better you can stand when you can breathe better, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, so you kind of keep going back, keep and with clients, I try to teach people how to solve their problem. It's like you look at your body. These are the points that there is dysfunction, there's pain, there's these are the points that are not standing, and you have to use effort to stand up. It might not feel like we're using effort to stand up, and that's because our body just adapts, like we talked about last in the last one. But there is definitely ways that our body just makes itself comfortable to just stand in weird positions. Like if your neck hurts on this side, you might like do this to your neck and get used to standing like this, and then all of a
Mm.
sudden your input is like this, and then this becomes the norm, right? And you see people do that all the time.
Well, in the same way that people don't aren't aware of the quality of the thoughts or how they're thinking in terms of how that relates to nervous system tone, I also don't think people are very in tune with how much effort it is to just stand because people aren't just spending time standing. Like I can, one of my practices is I will go with my feet a fist distance apart, stacked directly underneath my knees, directly underneath my hips, and I'll just stand in a neutral position with even distribution of weight and I'll start to see what comes up. Like if I do that right now, I notice that there's a little bit of like twisting, feeling tension in my right hip and a little bit through my piriformis. I notice that that's working a little bit harder, almost as if like I'm twisted out to the side on my right, which I know I do because I have a tendency to kind of lean into this side a little bit more. And so when I just get myself into a neutral standing position, I'm just standing there. I'm like, oh, this is kind of coming up. I know I need to kind of release these areas now. Um, and I'm aware of where I start to outsource some of my tension because I can actually feel it's like, okay, like this side of my leg has way more tone than this side of my leg. I'm starting to feel a twisting movement here. And it's just in the same way that you kind of observe your breath, you observe your thoughts in meditation and you develop that awareness, then you also can just stand because people are mostly sitting and then they also fidget, right? Like as soon as like the human body to accommodate for discomfort will adjust itself. Like you said, it's like someone has pain, they just kind of crank their neck there. It's like, oh, it feels better. And then they're just kind of like walking around with like a janky neck for their whole life. But instead of like fidgeting around, like line yourself up and see what comes up. Like just breathe into stacked tall posture, and again, like you might not even know what that is. You might, you might have to film yourself, and you might have to stand in front of a mirror and do some adjustments and kind of be like, oh, all right, like my, I'm like hips are way forward. I'm going to pull my hips, stack them under my ribs. My feet are really far apart. I'm going to put them, stack them underneath my hips. All right, cool. I'm aligned. All right, now I'm going to look straight ahead. And now what's happening with my body?
Mm-hmm.
What's being outsourced? And I think that's just as useful for people to figure out, like, if I find I'm finding myself, like I'm at my standing desk, I'm finding myself fidgeting a little bit. I know that after this, I'm going to go do some work on my right leg and find some equilibrium and get some distributed tone between my legs and my lower back and my lumbopelvic hip complex.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. It's definitely important to, I think, observe yourself. I mean, I have people, and it doesn't take much. Like it's like, make sure you're stacked like the way you said, stacked right on top of the other. And all of a sudden, like I put clients and myself in these positions, and all of a sudden you start breathing hard. And it's just like, this person is just standing. It's funny because in one of my classes, one, one of my clients was like, I can't believe we're working so hard by just standing,
Yeah.
which is, which to people is like, oh, what, standing? And then if you try it, if you start at your feet, just overall tip if people want to try it. You soften your knees, you make sure your weight is in your heels, you push your butt back a little bit, and then you try to stack on top of that without letting your hips go forward, okay? Because a lot of people tend to drive their hips forward and go into a sway like that. So you kind of keep your hips back, and then you try to get your upper body to come on top of that without allowing your hips to push forward. So you keep your hips back and you kind of get up, and you'll feel, I mean, you still have to stay tall, so you make sure your spine is not, keep your keep your spine as long as possible. And I mean, the more you do it, the more in tune you will get with the movement. You can watch yourself in the mirror, and you'll definitely see a difference.
Yeah. And this is like, I think there's the stacking ability, and like the aware, there has to be like a certain level of body awareness, proprioception, interoception. Like a person would need to know how to tilt their pelvis, shift their pelvis side to side, like lift and rotate their pelvis in different ways to make these adjustments. They have to do the same thing with their rib cage, with their head,
Yeah.
and then they kind of have to understand how to, move their shoulders, like using their scapula and having their scapula track their rib cage, and like learning how
Mm-hmm.
to engage their lats, and having that level of body awareness. And that's going to have to predicate or be like basically your stacking and your structure has to be predicated on that level of basic body awareness. Some people are going to need resistance to develop the body awareness. They're going to need some touch, some actual manual touch to actually, bring sensation back into that area. Some people, especially in their back, around their shoulders, if they have like intense scapular winging, or they have like very low activation of different musculature in their back that supports that, there's a lot of like, breathing and just like different types of things to bring just basic body awareness so that they can adjust and pull into these
Mm-hmm.
properly aligned positions. Once a
Yeah.
person has and for me, like this is the process. This is kind of what I wanted to like look at. You're looking at overall nervous system tone, because if you're jacked up and you're in this parasympathetic state, you're not going to make any meaningful changes to your body. And the like being in a fight or flight, you're not learning new things. And so your nervous system, which is responsible for holding your body in certain patterns and holding certain tensions, is not going to adjust properly. You need to be at a baseline level of just like neutral nervous system tone, more parasympathetic rest and digest, so that the inputs that you have are going to have some sort of impact on and then you can actually access the rest and digest state again and actually adapt. After you've done that, then you have to learn basic body awareness Now that you're calm, you can actually just like you have the basic awareness and the ability to interocept and propriocept and understand where your body is in space and where your body is in relationship to itself, and you can start to adjust and move yourself, and like you said, create that stack. And like that's hard work for people who have never done that. You have to develop that skill and that ability to understand how to move your body through space and how to adjust different things, and just developing that level of body awareness. And once that body awareness is developed, and once you learn how to do that stack, and put your shoulders in the right place and put your shoulder blades against your rib cage and breathe deep and have your stack like all lined up, then you actually have to focus on the tensioning side of it. You actually have to have pressure and integration and strength that's built. And I say strength like very carefully here, because it's a very vague word when you're talking about strength, in relationship to training in the gym. But you need to develop the ability for your tissues to integrate, and for your nervous system to hold yourself reflexively in this stacked position. And a lot of that's going to be, like you said, releasing myofascially and neuromyo-fascially, these holding patterns that keep you in these tight locked in positions, then stacking yourself in, and then actually creating supportive tension and counter tensions to hold yourself into these places afterwards. And that's your baseline. That's just your standing posture, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And so the stacking can apply to a lot of different things, right? Like you can do, not necessarily, nothing happens in isolation. So everything we do is all integrated. However, I do work on the scapula, the hips, in as a focus, not in isolation, but as a focus. So
Yeah.
but I do, like, ultimately you want the person to be able to stand up with somewhat good posture before they can even before they go into good movements, right? And have an like the awareness part is super important, right? Because, and that's most of it actually, because when you learn, oh, my hip can go, tilt back and forth, and like in this scenario I tilt it back, and in this scenario I'll tilt it forward, all of a sudden you have a better understanding of movement. All of a sudden you can apply this. So then I'll tell you to go do another move, and I'll tell you need to keep your hips in this place, in this
Yeah.
kind of relation, and all of a sudden you have an understanding of that, so we can communicate better as well. And myofascial release really helps with that, with developing just communication to, like, with the muscle, right? Like, because a lot of the communication pathways are blocked up, right? Like if your neck is tense, right, like you're not really able to feel your fingers as much as you should, right? So we kind of just, if you want to feel your fingers, you need to release the communication pathways. Then we can talk about, okay, this is how you make a fist, this is how you spread your
You're
fingers.
talking about like the communication pathways, like from your brain into your brainstem through your body into your,
Yeah, and,
your
and,
nervous
and through your
system.
fascia as well, just
Yeah.
your fascia being able to, like, if I'm too tight here, imagine an elastic band that's all bunched up over here, right? Like imagine an elastic band that goes from my neck to my fingertips. Just, I'm simplifying things here, and it's all bunched up at my neck, right? Like, it's going to be super thin and super stretched out in my fingers, right? It's just because it's all pulling on here, right? So then my fingers don't have as much ability as they should,
Right.
because they're just standing on thin ice.
Yeah. So it's overly tensioned
Yeah.
in a certain area, and that excessive tension. Yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, like the other thing that, like, fascia is innervated. Like
100%.
fascia, that's why it's like, that's why, I've used the word neuromyo-fascial a couple of times. And the expectation is that, people have been kind of listening to the podcast for a while. They listen to the Art of Move and they kind of know what that is. But your neuromyofascia, myo referring to muscles, fascia referring to the connective tissue that encases and wraps around the fascia, but then neuro, as in like each part of this fascial network, contains nerve endings, contains like aspects of your, like it's a part of your nervous system. Your fascia is part of your nervous system, and it is what determines like where you are in space, how like it's the pressure mediation. It's taking in so much information kinesthetically about you and your environment, how you're relating to your environment. You could almost say it's like an extended part of your brain, right? Like, and so these like when you have tense parts of the network that are like bunched up and that are in pain and that are like almost hogging the signal, you're not going to have the same level of sensitivity in other areas of your body. In some cases, like if it's unactive entirely, like the network's just offline, like in the example when I was saying, it's like you need to do some touch, or you need to have like a little bit of resistance so that you can learn how to activate. And this is like the one thing that I enjoy about bodybuilding is that it encourages the mind muscle connection so much. Like really good bodybuilders have a very good grasp of like how to flex certain muscles and like consciously and engage them and turn them on in certain ways. Yoga kind of encourages the same thing in some instances with the different posture balances and being in extreme stretches and like having to stretch in extreme positions while balancing at the same time. There's a certain amount of like body awareness that you need to have to adjust and align yourself into these certain ways. Now, can you take those principles and can you apply them to evolutionary biomechanics? Can you apply them to, this is how you move your body into correct human posture for optimal breathing mechanics, for proper nervous system signaling, for proper stacking, for tensegrity as an even distribution of tensions and compressions across your entire body. Can you apply those same ideas of body awareness to that? Because, unlike a bodybuilder who can actively flex their muscles, we want to reflexively flex our muscles in response to our movement, right? Like we don't want to have overly flexed quads when we're trying to have a pulse of tension, a pulse of contraction as we step, get that jolt of kinesthetic force go through our fascial networks, reflexively tense to create an even distribution of that force through our entire system, and then take the next step. Versus a bodybuilder is going to be like, boom, there's my quad, I just won the bodybuilding show.
Yeah. I mean, there is a difference in the way bodybuilders um, access muscles as opposed to, like just having a sensation of what the muscle feels like. A lot of times, for example, bodybuilders, they have to flex or create tension to feel the muscle. And this is something we've actually worked on together, where it's like, can you access the muscle without actually moving, say, your limbs? Can you flex your biceps without flexing your elbow? Can you like access your pec muscles without moving your shoulder back and forth?
Yeah.
So there is a different type of different type of activation between bodybuilding, but I do understand the value of it being that like it being valuable for just having like knowing what muscles feel like.
Well, yeah, I mean, like the reference here is that like sometimes you need to develop a deeper level of body awareness. You're going to need some resistance sometimes. So
Mm-hmm.
the way a bodybuilder develops like the awareness of like they want to flex their muscles on command, they do that with weights, and they do that with resistance training, and then they can flex incredibly hard, and they can create a tremendous amount of tension in their bodybuilding shows. Absent of that, now, the thing is, can we create pulsing tension? And like, can we do that deliberately? Can we get into certain postures and create deliberate amounts of tension in our system to emulate the tensioning that happens during gait or during running or during a throw? And can we pulse that? Can we kind of emulate more how that would show up in movement as opposed to just actively standing there flexing your muscles? Where like what's the purpose of flexing a muscle? What's the purpose of creating tension in a muscle? It's to like create the structural support and the structural integrity to help you mitigate forces, kinesthetic forces within and throughout your body. And
Mm-hmm.
so can we create an environment where we're training that capacity more effectively? And so in my mind, it's kind of like, if we're going to, like, I'm going to do an overview of our journey now. We're looking at the the nervous system tone. We're looking at the myofascial release, so releasing the sort of neurological holding patterns of misaligned posture. It's learning body awareness so that you can make active adjustments. Then it's applying resistance so that you can reflexively hold yourself in a good baseline posture where you can breathe deeply. And then you're looking at mechanical inefficiencies in your movement and what are causing those mechanical inefficiencies. And that's kind of where, I'll use running a lot. I'll film myself running and sprinting quite a bit to make sure that I'm looking at my gait cycle, that I'm like, if I film myself in slow motion running, I'll notice, okay, like I'm turning more on this side, I'm not swinging my arm up here, like I'm holding more tension on this side of my body. And then I have data to actually work from. You kind of have to know what you're looking for. You have to understand, gait mechanics and gait patterns, and you have to kind of look at, figure out what are you actually looking for here. The average person isn't going to see hip jarring as a problem. They're not even going to notice hip jarring or know what hip jarring is. They're not going to see a lack of, stability in the lumbopelvic hip complex in relation to lateral and spiraling forces. You're not going to see that on your average person, but you kind of have to have an ongoing relationship to you have to film yourself, you have to move, you have to understand in movement, where are your inefficiencies happening and how can you train the capacity for more reflexive, efficient movement.
Yeah. Or just hire a coach.
Yeah, well, that's the big thing, get Ali on board, and he'll and this is the whole thing. It's like you can watch someone now and you can see how they're you don't even need a slow motion video in a lot of cases. You're just giving people some dynamic movements and you're like, all right, this and this is kind of off. We're going to work on that. And in the span of a couple of weeks, you can take someone from, jacked up, freaking out to feeling comfortable in their body, being way more level and moving really, really efficiently. And then once you have that level of efficient movement, then you can start building capacity over it. Then you can start building complexity over it, so I'm going to save the after you build your foundation, where do you go from there? I think I'll save that for our next conversation, because there's a couple of different areas that I wanted to.
We got to your first question.
Yeah, exactly. We barely got to our first question here.
Yeah.
But yeah, would you say that's a pretty good overview of the starting point for most people? If you're starting to get into functional fitness, you're okay, I'm going to commit to this. I'm going to take some time off of doing the gym. I'm going to take some time off, doing all this other stuff with my body. I'm going to figure my stuff out. This is kind of where you start.
Yeah, I would say so. And, if you ask yourself, if you tell yourself, oh, I need to do this. And then you hear, oh, you need to go and massage yourself for a few weeks. And if you feel anxiety, then that means you need the massage. If it makes you anxious that you shouldn't go to the gym, if it makes you anxious that you shouldn't, you should start from zero, then you need to start from zero. That's a good tell sign of you needing to be in a state of rest and digest anyways. You need to take a break.
And I did, when I got into the Art of Move podcast and I started learning about functional fitness, I took almost 2 full years off of the gym. Mm-hmm. And off of pretty much any other physical activity. And I started working on my gait mechanics, on my, I had a whole, I'd say probably a 5-month period where I was just doing myofascial release and breathing. Mm-hmm. And this was also after 6 to 8 months of me doing other functional fitness systems like Goda and One of a Kind Fitness and other things. After I was doing even some of that stuff, I took a step back from even the functional fitness systems, and I just did the myofascial release and some Eldoa stuff. I was working with Adrian Vino, who's an amazing, amazing coach, by the way. He's out of Halifax. He's a good friend of mine. We interviewed him a couple of times for the Art of Move as well. But I was helping him with some business stuff, and then he would, in exchange, get on calls with me and just put me through workouts. And the workouts were just myofascial release. He'd pin me up with a Theracane, held down by a band, or he'd get my legs up on a couch and just digging into underneath my ribs. And then he'd get me doing some Eldoa stuff, which is just you're doing some very intense fascial stretching. And 6 months of that later, I was a different person. I had access to, a very much calmer nervous system. I was able to actually enact a lot of the different systems that I was learning, and like a lot of the movements that I was trying to get into and the positions I was trying to get into, I could actually get into them without my body being like, yeah, like without having to fight my way into them, so to speak. And yeah, like taking a step back and really dialing in just your baseline is a good move. And I mean, that's why I'm like in the Forge, which will be in the link in the description of this episode. It's the online community that I run. The next course that I'm putting out is the Foundations of Functional Fitness course, and the first thing is going to be that down regulation, that breathing, that myofascial release, but then also body awareness, and combining those two things as the first principle. And it's going to be teaching people like what, like what is the actual stack, like what is the posture that you're kind of looking for, like how do you identify that, how do you train that in yourself, how do you develop the body awareness for that. And this is kind of like the reason I wanted to talk about this. It's been top of mind for me as I've been trying to map out like what are the foundations of functional fitness. How does a person go from point A to point B? This is also why the Sapien Evolution, or it's the Sapien Evolution Temple in Montreal, that has the yin class that you guys just started. This is kind of why like you're bringing this like to mainstream fitness classes. You're the only ones who are doing this. You're the only ones who are helping people build like in a group setting, no less. Like a lot of people, like you'd be lucky to get like one-on-one attention, and you'd need that, but like to like you're not going to find many coaches who can even offer that. But then to find a group class environment where you're being taught this, if you live in Montreal and you're not going to the Sapien Evolution Temple, you're an idiot. Like, I'm sorry. Like you have to be going to these classes. You have to be seeing what Ali and Max are putting out here, because they're the only people who are doing this in a group setting, bar none. Like no one else is doing this in the world, let alone in Montreal.
Yeah, I mean, we found that people need it, right? Like we associate going to the gym with high intensity work. You either go do CrossFit or you go boxing or whatever it is. Like everybody is in that state of fight or flight. Everybody is like their gym time is fight or flight. And we have that as well. We have our yang classes. We got yin and yang, and you need both. Just like, I mean, Eastern philosophies knew this, right? Yin and yang, you need both of those. And our yin classes is to balance out all this stressful, and most of us have really stressful lives anyways. So it's like we need to decompress, and like going to the gym and pushing heavy weights or boxing. I mean, I box, I love boxing, but like, if your nervous system can't take it, it's probably not good for you, you know?
I do know. So on that note, I think this is a cool place to wrap up the conversation. I think we covered a lot of ground and got pretty deep into the topic. If anyone is interested in giving us feedback on what we missed, leave a comment in this video. You can also hit us up on Instagram. Ali is at MUVE mental, move mental. So move is with a U, and MUVE mental. I am at Anthony.Manuel, Manuele. And you can also just leave a comment or just message us on whatever platform you're listening to this episode on. Really, really enjoy having these conversations. We want to know where you agree, where you disagree, what things you want to hear us talk about next, what guests you want to have on the podcast, because we're going to start inviting other people on to have discussions about different aspects of functional fitness biomechanics and how to move, live, and exist in the human body. So send us your feedback there. And yeah, thanks again for having this conversation, bro. And thanks to everyone who listened.
Thank you. Ciao.